Welcome to the Waggle Room. When honeybees return to the hive, they perform a waggle dance, not to give answers, but to share signals, direction, distance, quality and possibility. Many dances can happen at once, different options, different signals, all moving through the colony together. Over time, patterns form, attention shifts, some signals fade, others gather momentum, and a way forward begins to emerge. Humans do this too, in groups, communities, in moments of uncertainty, long before anything feels clear or settled. The Waggle Room is a space to notice those signals, explore the systems they sit within, and make sense of what's emerging. Signals, systems, sense-making. Hi everyone, welcome to the Waggle Room. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Mike Jones on the podcast, and he'll give a little bit of his background in a minute, but organisations treat strategy these days as some sort of document, a plan, a slide deck. I'm so confident about what the future is, no one actually sees what's going on. But in the real world, it's not like that. It's a lot of uncertainty. Mike talks a lot about strategy in complex systems. Now, I've had the idea of the Waggle Room for some time, but I've got to give Mike a shout out because actually it was going on his podcast and speaking to him. That was the sort of last bit of the jigsaw to start my own podcast. So, mate, I just want to say like a massive thank you because it was down to you really to say, yeah, sort yourself out and do it.
No, my pleasure. You did a great job. It's awesome to see.
Thanks, mate. And like I say, we've already swapped seats once. How this happened, Mike got hold of me, right, and asked me to go on his podcast. And I never ever spoke to him before in my life. And from that sort of happening, that a bit of serendipity, and here we are. So, mate, before we go any further, be awesome to get a bit of your background, you know, what you're doing, where you come from, and how you got into what you're doing with strategy stuff now.
Yeah, so I'm not really writing my book at the moment. I was trying to do a bit of the introduction to how I got to the point where I deal with strategy. I don't really have a traditional background. I'm a soldier. As background, I was in the army 18 years, and I didn't really. So I had the reading age of a 6-year-old up to the age I was 28, and I started to read. So I taught myself to read properly by reading leadership because I spent several tours of Afghanistan. I really wanted to understand why do people follow you because they want to, not because they have to. So I started reading. So I picked up my first book at 28, read it, and that was it. I couldn't stop. So that led I taught myself cognitive psychology from that point. And then I wrote to every university in the UK and said, I've got no education, but can I come? I want to become a psychologist. And most of them said no. And then eventually Wolverhampton gave me an opportunity and I studied there to become a psychologist. Fortunately, I was medically discharged from the military. I didn't know really what to do, so I went into consultancy, and I didn't know what consultancy does. I still don't know what consultancy does now. But and then it led from there. I was mainly into leadership, and I realised there was something missing, that we were taking people out of this system that was broken, trying to fix them. So that led on to systems thinking. I studied system thinking. Now to the point now where I help organisations, really two domains that are interlinked, so strategy and organisations, because the two are tightly coupled. So we affect one, we're going to affect the other, and vice versa. So that's really my main focus at the moment.
The military things, obviously, we're both from a military background. You know, when you join up, I was a sapper. You were probably you private. So we join up like that, you know, and the whole leadership thing. We all know we're going through some sort of leadership training, but it's so ingrained in everything that's going on around you. It's like the fish doesn't realize it's in water. Like you don't realize you're surrounded by leadership going on, and it just happens. And obviously, the thing that I think we are very lucky with is we get a chance to put it into practice. Going back thinking about doing those noddy command tasks, you know, where you're going to fall in the custard-infested piranha pit. But that's all, you know, you're doing that within like a week of joining up, aren't you, with people you don't know? And
I think that's the key thing that I think civilian organisations treat leadership as right. You're now a senior, you're now a leader. You need to go on this leadership course and try to learn it all in a few weeks, then apply it. where in the military it's almost from day one. It's like it's not really explicitly talked about. We just do it, and everything around it supporting us. We build that individual leadership, that confidence at the start. But I've seen some organizations leadership courses, these for like senior executives, and they're teaching them like presentation skills. I'm
Yeah.
like, gee, it's probably way too late for that stuff now. Come on, they need more pressing stuff now. You should have done that like when they were young,
Yeah.
as we say, young buds. We teach them how to do that stuff at a very early age. Yeah, so I just think that I think the whole approach and the ability to have that space to train, I don't think it's replicated in civilian organisations.
Yeah. So the strategy side of it, again, this is just a very broad brush. Do you think when you join up, it's like almost, oh, the officers deal with, like it's like it's an officer thing, the strategy thing. I don't remember like as a young soldier, like people talking about strategy. I mean, you know, it was all coming on through the orders process, but like all that sort of stuff was like, that's what the officers talk about, is like the strategy doctrine and how we do this stuff. So I love the fact that you've gone into weaving your way into actually doing that. I mean, what strategy for you, what does it actually sort of mean?
I see strategy as the pursuit of viability and advantage. Oh, and there's really two key elements to this. There's the identity. People always flirt with this thing around policy, grand strategy, and all that stuff. I talk about grand strategy in the sense of identity. The organisation needs to know itself. What's its capability? What's its actual identity? What is it? And I think that gets dangerous because people use these purpose statements like, "Oh, we're
Yeah,
here to help Britain prosper." No, you're not. That's not what you do. You lunatic. And the other part is what I call the constant observation, reorientation, and adaptation to the circumstances and external environment. So it's always
yeah,
trying to get that fit. And I always say, and I'm doing a lot of research about strategy. And I think one thing we missed, and Sun Tzu, the Greeks, and all this talked about this, is that any leader, at any time, needs to hold three things or consider three things when they're doing strategy. They always talked about the ground. Obviously, we don't really have ground nowadays, but we have an ecosystem, we have an external environment that we need to consider. We need to consider they used to consider the enemy. Some have enemies, some don't.
yeah,
But it's the other actors, and we need to consider what the other actors are doing, and we need to appreciate that they are intelligent actors. I think leaders are too obsessed with the fact that there's them and there's no one else, and we can just do what we want.
yeah,
And then the other part is your own organization. Again, back to my point about identity. Like, you need to know the capability of your organization. So you consider those things, then strategy emerges from those, not from blind aspiration, which tends to happen.
yeah. Well, you mentioned, you know, some. In fact, no, I had it here
Oh,
because
well, there we
I knew
go.
you were going to bring it up. But I mean, what is interesting about in the first few pages of that book? I'm going to paraphrase what it is now, but it's like you can win a war without fighting a war. All the deception, all these type of things that don't necessarily get spoken about. I think when people read that book, The Art of War, they think that's going to be like bang, enemy against enemy.
And that's the thing. It's like when I talk about a lot of stuff with strategy and organizations, yes, I'm going to use some military terms and stuff but then people get switched off and they go, "Oh, it's just military." Not, no. There's a lot of stuff like Sun Tzu. That he was 5th century BC.
Mm.
So long time ago.
He's almost as old as us, mate.
Exactly. I know. Yeah, I knew him. But like the stuff he talks about in there is so applicable for today. Is that applicable? I think people forgot it. So,
Yeah,
and I talk about the enclosures, the sort of what are the key moments that happened in history that moved strategy from a way of being, a way of thinking. Like I was talking about this constant sensing, like Sun Tzu did. He intuitively had that wisdom to understand the ground, his own forces, the enemy. So how do I defeat this or get this advantage? And sometimes without even firing an arrow,
yeah,
to what we have now is nonsense. It's a document. And this is my problem. Most people, when they say, have you got a strategy? Go, yeah, we've got a strategy. Now pull this document out. Now, that's not
Yeah.
a strategy. That's a wishy-washy vision statement that means nothing. You've got values on there that are absurd, and it's just a waste. It's just a waste of paper. It's really what you have
Yeah.
there.
Well, talking about values, I've got this lady's coming on in a few weeks, I think, Erica.
Oh yeah,
And
sorry,
she's,
but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and she talks about junk values in there. And it's quite interesting. Go to the back, watch. She's done some research on finding the top 100 values statements. And I was just going around the internet looking at companies, and I was like, "Yep, that's 3 out of the 4." It's like
No,
it's the same.
it didn't take long. I went and searched pretty much. I was bored one day. Well, I was bored and a bit annoyed. So I went and looked at all the major companies in the UK, at what their strategy was. There's always, I always say an organisation always has a strategy if you know it or not, because you are reacting to something.
Yeah,
But their claim strategy is horrendous. You have people there like, we're here to help, and always around like help communities prosper and stuff like that. I'm like, that's not what you do. You're a water company. If you're helping
yeah,
communities prosper, why are you getting fined hundreds of millions of pounds for pollution? It's absurd. But it seems to be that now, if you go to, and I couldn't believe this, because when I first left the military, I was a bit bitter about leaving the military, because I always wanted to stay in and be a soldier, and I couldn't be anymore. So I pushed everything military. I was like, no relevance here.
yeah,
I don't need it. And I remember getting invited to a strategy session. I stayed away from strategy because, again, like you said, that was always for officers, and we were the ones
yeah,
who enacted strategy. We weren't the ones doing strategies. And I thought, organisation, they must be all over it because they've got more money. They've got strategy teams. Every other word they use is called strategic. And I thought these would be great. So I was like, when I got invited to it, I was like, this would be awesome. I can't wait to see it. And I couldn't believe it. I turned up and the room was busy, like really busy, but none of it was strategic. There was like
yeah,
people sitting there trying to. I remember we sat in there, we had to close our eyes to ground ourselves and talk about what we're bringing into the room. I was like, what the hell is this? Then they brought out some marshmallows, and I was just like, oh, nice treats. Yeah, but we had to build a tower with it, and I was like, what is this? And then majority of the day was spent wordsmithing this absolute dross of a statement. I no word of lie, there were 2 hours they were arguing about if they should have diverse or inclusive in the vision statement. So they didn't want both. So they were arguing, and I was just like, what? This is nothing to do. Nothing was about the external environment. Nothing
yeah,
was about any other actors. And from what they were saying, I don't think they had a clue what the internal environment, that their own organisation was doing. Yeah, so it was just car crash. And from that point, I was like, right, I need to understand this. This can't be
yeah.
real. Yeah.
Well, when you were saying about almost like forgetting history, I think this happens in organisations, doesn't it? They have like this corporate amnesia.
Yeah.
It's like, if we can't remember things that were written thousands of years ago that actually made sense, it's got worse because we can't remember what worked 3 years ago in organisations. And then we spend an inordinate amount of time rebuilding what worked 3 years ago because it seems like now somebody else's good idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is a problem. I was talking about identity of the organization. And a lot of that is formed, not because you want that identity, it's formed by past decisions. So decisions you've made, things you've invested in, all this stuff is now amounted to who you are as an organization. But I've seen it where leaders, they forget that they've made critical decisions, and they're going like,
Yeah,
why? I was working with an organization, and I was really confused. So I said, just tell me. Like, I want to show what departments or capabilities you have, and they all were adamant they had this capability, but they forgot that they defunded it 2 years ago. So for 2 years, they thought they had this capability because they forgot the decision they made to defund it. So when people are like, but no one below them would tell them, because it was almost like, well, there's no point telling them because they're not going to listen.
yeah.
And
God, it's
it's,
mad.
yeah. And that's the thing about this whole identity piece, is like those decisions are really crucial, But then not only that, those decisions, they limit what's possible for you in the future. So you must understand these decisions, why we're making them. And there's a Native American Indian tribe, and I'm going to read back because I forgot which one it was, but they had this thing about when they make decisions, they look 3 generations back to understand, what happened, and have they made those decisions, and then they look 3 generations forward to think about, if we make this decision, how's that going to impact and constrain our future generations? And I think that's a wise thing for organisations to realise. One is appreciate decisions, and how have we done that in the past, and what's it mean, and what decisions have we made that's now important to this? And then also thinking, if we make this decision, what constraint will that bring in the future?
Yeah, that's amazing. And you think that's people are doing that so long ago. It's almost like after action reviews, red teaming, all these concepts. It's the same thing. When you were talking about, again, if you think thousands of years ago, unless it was a stone or something, there was nothing to write anything on. So how did they convey what the strategy was? And I just think it was like literally with a stick and drawing stuff in some dirt on the floor, and like, right, that's it. We go from there. And because the people involved, they all work on like heuristics, rules that they give you some constraint, but they're not over constraining. And then you're given this freedom, aren't you, to actually do stuff. So how the hell have we gone from doing stuff in a bit of dirt ground to producing 50-page PowerPoint presentations?
Yeah. I mean, we don't even communicate to people. Like, it's almost, I keep seeing it all the time, there's this invisible wall between those who make the strategy. And I talk about Taylorism is the contribute to this, because that's where we really started to think that managers do the thinking, and the people just do the doing, and they don't mix. But it's almost they just throw it over the wall and accept that people will somehow be able to translate this into action, when most of it's not. Where you think about when we're in the military, I've been there before, where we're in an attack and I'm just on the bit of ground, and I've only got a few minutes to prepare something, and I've literally sketched out a model of the ground, the dirt, and I've got my section commanders there, and I'm like, right, fucking, you're to do this, you're to do this, you're to do this. Are you all happy? And we take them through it. But they see it, and you get that, any questions, and you invite that dialogue so people can interpret it and understand. I think we've lost that now, that interpretation, that space for simulation's gone. And we just expect people to intuitively understand some crazy ideas that were thought up in a hotel room.
Well, I had a guy on last week, Chris Maron, he was in 5'9", Commando Engineers, and he's doing a lot of coaching and consulting now. Great guy. He's just written a kid's book called Mickey Monroe. And after each chapter, he's got a reflection. And I've got it for the kids. My kids read it in a couple of days. They loved it. One of the things we spoke about was literally this the other day around, I can't remember really the last time someone was like, but do you understand what I've just, you think about it as a section commander under your poncho. Yeah. You've made that model, haven't you? It's like you've all got a little model kit. Because only looking back now, you start thinking, oh, yeah, that was like really valuable doing all that. That model was like, we were all around it. And then after every bit of this orders process, it's like, right, John, do you understand what I've just told you, that what you're going to be doing at this point of the mission? We don't tend to do that in organisations. I don't know if it's because I'm going to upset someone by putting them under the spotlight, or, I'm going to ask them a question and they're not going to be able to answer it.
And that's the thing, when you're doing that, we're doing that, all that planning, we say in the military, the plan is nothing, planning is everything. Yeah. Because we're not doing that to come up with a perfect answer. We're doing it to give people the framework and the cognitive framework to adapt. Because we know that the strategy is not going to survive reality. So we need people to adapt. And the only way they can adapt is if they've understood implicitly what you're after, what's the intent, what's my constraints, what's my part I need to play in this. Once they understand that gives them the freedom of action to adapt. But we don't have that in civilian organisations. They don't value the time to do that. The only sort of time you get, if you've seen in most organisations, is like, it's a quick little 5 minute before another meeting. And that's not rich enough to really get that across and make sure that person implicitly understands what it is that you're trying to achieve.
I mean, you look at, people's diaries, the seniors that I work with, how on earth they actually absorb any information. It's like all day in going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. But your brain must just be like mush. How you're then meant to have the cognitive ability to take all that information in and turn it into some sort of communication that you can pass to other people. It's just such a massive problem.
Yeah. You think going back, just think about Sun Tzu and all that stuff, they would have had a different problem. And Clausewitz talked about this as well, which is it's the fragmentation of information. Because we didn't have all these, we didn't have drones, we didn't have, Power BI boards with all this information. Yeah. You were relying on scouts to come out. And as we know, with humans, we all interpret things very differently and we'll communicate very different. So they've got to deal with this fragmentation of information to try and then make to go, okay, that's what we need to do. But nowadays, we have an absorption problem because leaders, they've got too much information to absorb. And actually, that I don't know what's more dangerous, because at least back in the day of Sun Tzu, they knew they didn't have all the information, where I think that now leaders seem to think that they have all the information there and that the information will be perfect. And if the information is not perfect, they can find more information. And they go through this paralysis cycle of wanting more information, more detail. What that means in reality is you get this proliferation of meetings because they want to know everything, because they're expected to know everything. And before you know it, you've got senior leaders getting involved in tactical and operational decisions just because the information's there and they're getting drawn into it all the time. And that's why I wonder, how good is the model that they're using to understand the strategy, like I was saying there, the ground, the other actors, and their own organisation.
I mean, obviously the scout thing's interesting because it's just, you get scout bees, don't you? That's exactly what scout bees do. They all go off. They don't all go to the same place. They all go off in different directions. They come back. They'll do a waggle dance. They'll find out how that waggle dance amplifies. They don't have to have consensus because they don't make decisions like that. It's all based on a quorum method, and then they do something. They won't wait for John, because John's on leave, so we can't make a decision. And then Tracy's on leave, because then the hive's dead. I'm the first one to say bees are not humans, obviously, but all this stuff is based in some sort of sense making. It's all nature, it's a complex adaptive system. It's the reason why Dave Snowden's just released Swarm Compass. So I think there are things you can learn from this, but the strategy is one thing. You've obviously got to enact it. Do you think there's almost a decision making problem as well? Like who is actually going to make the decision? And everyone seems to want to, no, you can do that. I want to be the person.
I don't think, like you say about the bees have a clear role and identity, what they do. And I think that's missing. So consensus is a problem. I don't think people actually realise the importance of the organisational structure on executing strategy, and decision rights. Now, if I go into an organisation and I say to me, and I do this quite often, I say to teams, what does your team do? And it seems like a real simple question, but once we got over all the nonsense that they'll come out with, we're here to make a difference with this. No, you're not. No. What does your team do? What's the role? What is the expected output or outcome that your team's expected to produce? Once you get to that point, and then I want to know what decisions can you make and what can't you make?
Yeah.
And that's what it is. That's the constraints. So what constraints have you got? And then I want to know what is the direction? What's the intent of your? And this is one thing the military does really well, is we call the 1 up, 2 up. So I'll know in detail what the intent of 1 up above me and also the 2 up, and that gives me enough framework. If you have those things in place, that gives you the freedom of action to be able to adapt. But you don't have those in place, then you lose all coherence and it becomes chaotic. And then what people tend not to do is make decisions. And that's why things just escalate all the time, and it slows the organisation down. You go for this incestuous amplification, this internal entropy, where
Yeah.
all these things happening, no one's making a decision. Because no one made a decision, we need to put more process policies in place. Before you know it, we removed any freedom of action, and no one can do anything without a million sign-offs, and a
Yeah.
sign-off from people that should be doing the strategic thinking. Yeah, so to that point, I think it's that real lack of those basic structures. And then the problem is people look at it just a behavioural problem. Oh, the culture's bad, or
Yeah.
yeah, they go straight to that. But I've told them they're empowered. It doesn't matter. You can tell them they're
No.
empowered all they want. Yeah, if they don't have those structural things in place, your words mean nothing. Honestly,
No. I was speaking to Nigel Thurlow the other day, and he was saying, they take the system when you're earning whatever it is. He lives out in America, and he was like, people out there, people that aren't in massive companies are earning $3 to $5 million a year as CEOs in these companies. He said that you do not understand the size of the wealth in the United States. You cannot get your head around it compared to what's going on in the UK. So he's like, you have these people at the top that are earning that much money. He was speaking to somebody, and their biggest problem was the fact that there was a flood and their boat got damaged. Let alone worrying about anyone below that is probably now their house is completely gone. He was saying, like, the problem is the system's not messed up for them. The system works perfectly for those people, because what happens is they're sitting on in these lofty positions, and then it's like, oh, chaos. Yeah, we have to make a decision. Oh, we've got over the chasm, back to normal. And then it's like it goes down the way, and it's like, yeah, but you have to change your behavior. That phrase, you've got to change your mindset, which we all, how on earth can you change someone's mindset? I mean,
no, it's one of those. This mindset thing is one of the biggest lies I think is ever taught. We've gone through generations of convincing leaders that they're freaking Harry Potter. That they can wave a magic wand and things will happen, and that as long as you believe it, it will come true. And you've got they go to the executive MBAs, and it's almost like the end they give them a ruby pair of slippers that they put on. You ever in trouble, mate, you just click your heels twice and wish what you want, and it will come true. Because that's how they give direction. That's how they give the thing. We're going to be, customer-centric organisation. Shut up. That's not, that's an effect. And I think they confuse all this stuff. And I think that just means we create these leaders that are disconnected with reality.
Yeah.
So you're saying about them, he's worried about his boat. That person has not really, we go back to think about scouts, they have not spent meaningful time with people in the organisation.
Yeah.
Beyond the typical, I'm going to go walk the floor. How amazing am I? Grace you, peasants, with my 2 minutes. That's just rubbish. And I think I couldn't imagine, people like Sun Tzu and the Greek law, generals, not actually intimately spending time with their people to know what capability are, because it's so important. I was saying,
100%.
you need to know what your organisation is capable, because with anything with strategy, it limits what's possible. You can have all the biggest aspiration you want in the world, but if your organisation is not capable, you're not going to deliver it.
That leads on to the thing around, there's a lot of power dynamics go on in organisations, and if you're not the one that's got your name sort of ink drying on the bottom of the strategy document, and Trevor over there, who's the same grade, isn't the one with his name on the bottom of it, like all this power stuff. I mean,
yeah.
So you could have this strategy, but the power dynamics within it, the strategy could be awesome, couldn't it? But the power dynamics must have some sort of imprint on how it actually goes, and you've got to give up some power, which is difficult for people to do.
Yeah, it does. Again, it's we allow a lot of this stuff to happen and breed, like this whole to the other end of the scale where it's all about consensus. So we can't make a decision because we'll upset someone. Everyone has to be involved, and I think that's a problem, because we seem to convince that everyone has to be a part of the decision making, and if someone hasn't got their name to it or they agree, that's it. It can't happen.
Yeah.
Because Sally's are not happy because she wasn't invited to the meeting. That's just rubbish. And Clausewitz talks about this a lot around divergence of action. So what he was talking about was that we need to have that clear intent, and the roles need to be clear, and decision about accountabilities. What are you accountable for delivering on this? If you don't have those, and again, it comes back to, I keep going back to, it's more of a structural problem more than it is a behavioural problem. And that we need to make sure that we've got those things in place, like accountability, decision rights, role clarity, all those things are structured correctly. Because it's easier then to hold people to account, and we could play less of the power dynamics. Otherwise, what happens if we don't have those and we treat that, it's all a lot of ambiguity, people will exploit that, and they'll start making their own fiefdoms, and they'll do what they need to do. So yeah, I think going back to that more of a look at the structure first.
I'll give a shout out to a guy called Ben Ford. Do you know Ben?
Yeah, he's been on my podcast. Yeah.
Ben's
lovely.
Awesome, isn't he?
Ben's a lovely guy.
Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I can't remember if we got talking, but it was a couple of years ago. And when we were chatting one day, he says it leads into this sort of thing. He said, "There's one book that you should read, right? And it's that."
Charles Milton Churchill's. I don't think I actually read that.
Mate, it's absolutely awesome. What it is, it's the story of how actually like SOE was formed, really.
Oh,
and how when the Second World War was going on, you had this whole, it wasn't called the Ministry of Defence then, was it? It was called something else. But you had all this power structure, and things had been done, nothing had really changed from the First World War, all the way decisions were made. So you had this whole structure. And Churchill realised that there was no way you were going to you had to get people doing things differently. But he just couldn't get the system below him to change. So he literally just bypassed it.
Yeah.
He literally just bypassed it. He formed these small teams of people. They were people that were making caravans. It's honestly, it's the most amazing story. And that's how they got the SOE formed. So it was like looking at the problem differently. So one of the stories in that book is about how do we stop the Germans making so many tanks? And the thought is, well, you have to bomb the factory. And actually it was, no, you don't. What you do is you make these little sticky bombs, one thing, and also you make little packets of grit from socks, and you put them in the engines of the trains that drive the tanks away from the factories. Because then that breaks down, you can't get any more tanks out of the... You know what I mean? And it's an absolutely brilliant book to think about how you can bypass a system and then actually have an effect.
Yeah. And
I think the problem there is, or the thing that sticks in my head is, you had Churchill actually. If something had gone wrong, he would have turned around and said, I told him to do that. Where does that exist in organisations now?
There obviously are people out there, but if you just look at what we all see on with our politicians at the moment, they're meant to be the leaders of the country, and they no one takes accountability there. It's someone else's fault. You just look at it now with Gestama. He's sacked a load of people because it clearly wasn't his fault. So, and you see this on everything. Like you see it on TV for The Apprentice. You ever watch Apprentice?
God, I can't watch it anymore, mate. I can't watch it anymore.
Yeah, because that's the archetypal thing that we talk about that is not how you do things, but that's what they encourage. They encourage you to say, you know what, I put my hand up, I messed up there. Because they get fired. Now, all this, leaders are going, God, if I take ownership of this decision, I'm fired. And you see
the way they spoke. Do you know what the thing about The Apprentice? The reason I stopped watching it is because it's the way they were speaking to each other. I thought, oh my God, imagine working for someone like that.
You don't.
Horrendous.
It's like leadership programs. Like you don't need to create a leadership program to tell people what to do. You just get them to watch The Apprentice and say, just do everything. Do the opposite to what they say. Everything they do the opposite, and you'll be fantastic. Talk about what we were talking about earlier about the planning. They don't do that either. They don't come up with clear intent. They just come together and go, right, we're going to go do this. Right, let's go. And they wonder why it just completely falls apart because they don't do anything useful on that program. No.
I love your last podcast. It was brilliant with Stephen Bungay, wasn't it? Well, that's
Yeah,
the one.
yeah, yeah.
That's the yeah. That was so good. I mean, how did you go about getting him on then? Because he's quite, he's a
He
pretty well
was.
known person.
Yeah, I reached out to him last year, but he was unwell. It sort of delayed. Then he was back, and he just got back in touch and said he's ready to do the podcast. I was like, oh, nice
Yeah,
one.
he's cool. That was good. That podcast.
Because that Art of Action book, I think, is really useful trying to understand how do you apply this thinking. How do we get the planning, the mission command, basically? How do we get mission command into organisations in a useful way so that people
Yeah.
have the freedom of action?
So obviously we can't have a conversation anymore without talking about AI, because it would not, yes, everyone's. I mean, I've been putting some stuff on LinkedIn. It's doing my head in, to be honest. I saw a post last night from Scrum Inc. So they've produced now a Scrum Inc. AI course, and I literally just put on and it's got a digital badge, and I'm not trying to be awkward or anything like that, but I'm like, literally, you could do this yourself with a bit of curiosity and a free LLM, whatever LLM you want, LLM account, and then produce your own digital badge. I'm like,
Yeah.
this labeling of everything with AI to do with and I'm working in that space, so I suppose I'm doubly annoys everyone rebranded themselves as an AI something or
Oh,
other.
it annoys me, especially now. It's like you can't do, like, I engage with clients, and it's almost like you have to mention AI.
Yeah,
Otherwise, if you're doing a leadership program, it's got to be leadership of AI. Like, well, no, like it doesn't matter. You can have AI, but if you don't have the critical thinking, in the first place, or the understanding of how this stuff works, AI is not going to help you.
no,
It's like
no,
there's a mad rush at the moment for AI to solve your problems. Now, I'm creating a platform with my business partner Patrick Hoverstart. We had this dilemma around this because you can have AI and AI can help you, but I was like, you can't have AI do strategy for you.
yeah,
Like, it can help you, and we've got it in a ways where when we're doing modeling actors, we've got the AI bit to it recognizes who we're modeling against in the thing, and it will be that person. So you can
yeah,
ask it questions like, what's your latest turnover? And it has to find it, what's your core strengths, but it has to go find and give evidence to the reason why it's saying that, rather than just having
yeah,
illusions. But people are going on to AI and going, this is my situation, give me a strategy. And they're trusting
yeah.
it. I'm
I
like,
know.
but that will not work. When it won't be strategy, it'll be that horrendous Greek villa. It'll give you a vision statement, priorities, and things. It'll be horrendous. But two, the development strategy requires what I call the cognitive, behavioural, and affective emotions. That whole part of developing the strategy with other people, hearing what other people's different perceptions, the challenges, the surfacing of all these emotions is really important, because that then leads to action. If you don't have that ownership, then people aren't going to do anything different.
Imagine someone's listening to this now and they're going through yearly thing, isn't it? Oh, we're doing the strategy on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
You're like, the world's changed like shitloads over the past year. I mean, have we not done anything up to this point? Because we're going to be in big trouble. What would you say to somebody if they're watching this podcast and it was like, well, what should they stop doing and what should they start doing from a strategy perspective, do you think?
If your strategy looks like a Greek villa, so you've got a vision statement, priorities, and things, and especially with that vision statement is just vague, and the priorities are just pseudo policies, then stop doing that. Like, stop
Yeah,
treating strategy as and I think the key point to that is stop treating strategy as an output of a thing. Like, we've done it, we've got this document, so stop doing that and start treating strategy as a way of being a continuous act of reorientation. And what I mean by that is that strategy isn't a one-off cycle thing, it's a continuous thing. So always thinking about, well, again, the three areas are key. So what's happening in the ecosystem that's changed? So what new constraints, what regulatory changes, what's a competitor doing that we didn't expect? how are they responding to what we're doing? And that comes to the actors. So who are the key actors and what they're doing? What's changed? What's your relationship relative to them? And then think about your organisation.
Yeah.
What's happening? Where are we? Where are we getting stuck? What's preventing our teams from closing the gap between capable and actual performance? You start thinking about those things, how they're interrelated, and it's a continuous thing. Then you can see strategy as a pursuit of viability rather than some nonsense aspiration.
I've got one more question to ask you, but before I ask you that, where can people find what you're doing, mate? What you're working on? Where can they go to engage with you and get you to come and do some work from?
Yeah, so I do my podcast too, which you've been a great guest on. You can find your episode. I highly recommend that. So that's on Strategy Meets Reality. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot writing. So Mike, put the H Jones, or just look for someone who's got a massive desperate Dan George gurning away on the picture. Yeah, or I've got my Substack. You find me on Substack, so When Strategy Meets Reality. And I've got my book hopefully coming out at the end of this year, or maybe start of next year, depends on the timeline with publishers. But yeah, reach out to me. I obsess about strategy. Having a chat with someone about strategy is never a chore.
No, I love the stuff you're doing, mate. It's I'm always reading it, and like I say, you were the person that was like, after thinking, I need to do something here. And I'm like you, I've never really written lots of things myself. I find it quite difficult. But on the train last night, I started writing like my first blog around like the signal that the first guest on my pod talked about, and I just sat there and I was just writing stuff down. And I thought, yeah, I can maybe give this a go. So again, I just got to give you a big chuck up, because I really do appreciate you doing that. Really do.
No, I appreciate it. No, it's great to be on. I always love having a chat with you anyway.
Well, the last question then, right, is from your perspective, what's the signal you think we're failing to see?
Good question. I think, and I've written about this not too long ago, I call it cognitive security. So how leaders, and it's really important for strategy, is how your thoughts, your beliefs are being shaped by the echo chambers we sort of create ourselves. And you see this as a sort of outside of strategy world, in not civilian world, but non-organizations. You see it that people are locked into these different types of media that are shaping their beliefs, and they're not realizing how much this misinformation and all that is actually shaping their beliefs, and they are being shaped by the message. And it's the same for leaders inside organizations, is how much they're being shaped by the information that's going upwards and narratives around them. This, what we call, John Boyd called it, incestuous amplification. And I think that's really important. So how do you maintain your cognitive security? How are you understanding what information you're being fed, and be curious about it, challenge it.
Yeah.
Always being willing to look for differences, the difference between what you believe to be true and what's actually happening in reality. And it's those differences that matter, and always be conscious of your own cognitive security.
Yeah, that's really good. I was watching a video last night, and it was Colin Powell came up. I think it was Fort Bragg, was it, or wherever he went through training. And his drill sergeant said to him, "You'll know that you're a good leader when people follow you because they're curious." So the fact that you just use that word curious, there's not enough curious people about there. And then it's just the same stuff.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, go down. Imagine like Sun Tzu and the scouts. Now, your scouts are there. You've got them. They're at the edges of your organization. Go speak to them and see what they're seeing and why they're seeing it, and what they're, why they're saying these things, and be curious about that.
Yeah. Mate, thanks ever so much for your time. Absolute pleasure. Awesome. I love speaking to you. And, we'll hopefully be catching up soon. So,
yes, yeah, everybody.
Bye, mate.